welcome to Hopscotch Friday, your pop culture binge with Stevie and Emmet.
Hello, and welcome to an episode of Hopscotch Friday. This is Emmet.
And Stevie.
And today we're going to be talking about our flag means death.
I keep getting it wrong.
Our
The title.
flag means death.
Yes, correct.
Which is the little pirate show with a lot of heart that took the world by storm there.
Yes, but I think first we should mention a completely batshit crazy show that we just discovered that is from 2015, 2016. So like it's a bit old now, but it's called the Almost Impossible Game Show. It's a British game show. And what channel did you find it on here?
It's available here in Australia on Prime.
And it was an ITV2 show.
Correct.
That is narrated by the Rubber Bandits, who, if you don't know who the Rubber Bandits are, you probably need to find out. But they are comedy Irish hip-hop duo from Limerick.
Musicians and philosophers.
And philosophizers. So Blind Boy Boat Club and Mr. Chrome, they narrate this show, and it is just the most ridiculous obstacles that people have to do. So I was asking for Emmet to try and find me, because I'm very bad with knowing what to find on what channel and all the rest of it. Like we're back in the day where there's too many channels and I don't know what the heck is going on. There's also a cat currently climbing the door frame, so we'll just keep an eye out for that in case we need to jump and let her down, because she's very good at going up, not so good at coming down. But anyway, back to this show. I wanted you to find Taskmaster for me. And, that's ridiculous obstacles as well in a different way. But you found this show, and it's just, I think we just barely laughed our way through the first episode because it's utterly ridiculous. But I'm not a massive fan of your kind of things where people are hurting themselves on purpose or people look like they're in pain. But it's the narration that comes over the top that is just so bizarre. The pairing of the two, and these people are up for it, of course. You sign up for these kind of things. Yeah, we've only watched one episode. It could get very tired very quickly, but that was some comic relief that I desperately needed this evening. So
I have faith in the Rubber Bandits. I remember they did a show for RTE where they presented a version of events of the War of Independence and the Irish Republican Army, which was flabbergasting because it was like, oh, I've never seen these events depicted in a, relatively positive light. There's always been a sort of, they went a bit far there. Went a bit far there now. Maybe we shouldn't be celebrating those people now. Oh no, I know. So there are Republicans, mental health advocates, very game for taking on the sort of media establishment in Ireland. Really, Blind Boy Boat Club's podcast is excellent, really worth a listen. So I saw that they were narrating this game show. I, for some reason, had in my head it was a German game show. It's British through and through, which of course lends itself to the Rubber Bandits and their Republican sympathies, because there's a lot of them just ripping the piss out of posh people on this show. These people who, I have to wonder if they're aspiring actors or models or something. They're on a cast list somewhere.
Absolutely.
So yeah, they have lived lives that have allowed them to participate in these kinds of activities.
Yes.
They're not working down the mine. So yeah, the Rubber Bandits are just ripping the piss out of certain folks. And there was one guy, and I think I said, "Oh, look at the future leader of the Tory party." And then Blind Boy Boat Club was like, "Look at the future Prime Minister of Britain." I was like, "There you go. You see."
Yeah, he'll be the Prime Minister one day. But the line I think that got me was one of the people had failed at their attempt at something. And this is the thing, like they introduce it and it's these people have 50 lives to do all these stupid things, and you think, oh, this is going to drag on forever. It doesn't. It kind of rips through the whole thing. But one of the people had failed one of the challenges quite miserably. And what did he say? It was like, apologize to your God and hope that they're a compassionate one.
They're one of the compassionate ones. Yeah.
Too funny. Like, it was just honestly ridiculous.
That's
Sometimes you
why
need
I
a bit
think
of
that's why I have
ridiculous.
faith in this. That's why I have faith in this show, because they come up with these sort of expressions every now and then, which are clearly genuinely off the cuff remarks.
Yeah.
And we recently tried to watch the Wipeout US Wipeout remake,
Oh yeah, that was terrible.
which had herself from the baking show,
Nicole Byers.
Nicole Byers, yes, and John Cena. And we had watched a season previous. Not, we hadn't watched a season. We'd watched an episode. I think we got like 10 minutes in with the previous hosts, and it was painfully written. Like, it was clearly
Yeah.
scripted, and also they were very stilted in their delivery. And then when we heard Nicole Byers and John Cena doing, okay, well, this will be better because they're very both, 1,000-watt fold charisma, um, emanating out of them. They're just remarkably charismatic people, both of them. And I was looking forward to watching it, and then it was like, oh no, they didn't fire the writers. The writers are still writing the
No,
scripts.
it was very bad.
Whereas I have faith in this show because the Rubber Bandits are the Rubber Bandits. There's nobody else like them.
Yeah.
And one of the few moments of enjoyment that I got from that Train Spotting 2 film, which I was, really disappointing. One of the few moments in the movie that I enjoyed was where Renton and Sick Boy are watching a Rubber Bandits music video and just like agog, like, what is this? Like, what is this music? Like, the idea of the Rubber Bandits making the guys from Train Spotting feel old and left behind by this generation, I thought was a genius moment, genius idea. I think the filmmakers think that, it's funny to feature the Rubber Bandits because they're so ridiculous. It's like, no, they're good. If you're feeling old because of this, well, that's on you.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I'm looking forward to watching more of this show.
I think we will. But no, so we're going back to topic at hand. Our flag means death, which I keep calling different random names. Would you like to give us a rundown of what this is all about?
Well, Our Flag Means Death is loosely based on the life of the gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet, who left his wife and family, I think was it Barbados is where they're based? He's a landowner,
Yes.
sugarcane plantation owner, and he took to the seas. He decided he was going to become a pirate. He outfitted a sort of luxury ship for himself. He hired a crew, he paid them a wage, and they set off, and they were for a life of piracy, clearly drawn from storybooks. So these are events that actually did happen, and he wasn't a particularly good pirate. He was known as
He had no experience really. He just one day
No.
decided, despite having everything handed to him on a silver platter, that he wanted to go and be a pirate. Also, family at home, but whatever.
Yeah, he just left them to deal with the situation. As he took off, he's on the sea. He's not particularly good at what he's trying to do, and somehow through reputation, word of mouth, stories of this failed pirate, like being ever so polite but also ineffectual, he was approached by Blackbeard, who accounts differ, but the general implication is that Blackbeard took Stede under his wing, perhaps took advantage of him, took over the ship more or less. But there is a sense that he was fascinated by Stede as just a strange creature, too weird to live, too strange to die, something like that. And yeah, it's a very interesting story. There was a recent two-parter, I think, on Last Podcast on the Left. They went into it in some detail. I find it funny that the lads who host that show hadn't actually watched Our Flag Means Death. But I know a lot of people, on the basis of this show, are now examining the lives of Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard and what they really were like as people, as men, because this show is so heartfelt and warm that I think if you actually look into the lives of the original characters, you're going to maybe feel a bit let down.
Well, they were pirates, and I think even through this, it's funny because yes, they're very lovely, but it's all very kind of tongue firmly in cheek, and it's taking something that it's kind of in the same vein as what we do in the shadows, in that you're taking something that is traditionally considered nasty or horrible in this case it's piracy. What we do with the shadows, you're looking at traditions around vampires and concepts there, and you're turning them into very sympathetic characters and giving them a little bit of depth, when in actual fact I don't know that pirates 1700s pirates were not particularly nice people, I would assume.
Exactly what I was just about to argue the point on. So what's interesting with the pirates is the pirates were existing outside the law. That doesn't mean necessarily that they were bad people. It means that they were not abiding by the law of whatever queen or king.
But they had their own codes.
They had their own codes, they had their own system. And the story about what's interesting about Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard is that Blackbeard genuinely seems to have protected him. And there does seem to have been a sense of, well, I'm not going to let you die out here. I'm going to try and take care of you. And there seems to have been some genuine affection there. And that's enough of a seed for this show to explore that more and explore masculinity and explore ideas of gender. And, I think the comparison you mentioned, What We Do in the Shadows, the other comparison I would make would be Jojo Rabbit, not just because both of them feature Taika Waititi, but both of them feature a similar approach to these historical characters, which is that Taika Waititi basically didn't bother doing the research and just riffed on the premise. And I know it's a scripted show, it's not improvised for the most part, it's something that exists on the page. I think David Jenkins, who's a very young man who's accomplished quite a lot in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I looked him up and I'm like, what else has he done? And it's not a lot.
Not a lot, another thing.
Good for that guy.
But between them, and I think Taika did some directing work on this too, there is a sense of it being in the Taika verse, even though it's not his show, it's Jenkins's show, but it sort of speaks to that idea that we keep circling back to, that notion of happy sad, that notion of being gentle doesn't mean being nice, because these characters are lovable and we grow as a viewer of the show. I think you come to a point where you gain a love for affection for the characters, but they're not necessarily good people either. So morality for them is in flux. And that's what makes it an interesting show, I think. It's a reassessment of what's going on. Yep.
I hate to interrupt you, but can you please take the cat off the wall?
I will take care of the cat. You keep talking.
I will continue with telling the story.
Your impressions of the show. So we've established that this show is based on actual historical events. Talk about the actual show.
Okie doke. So for those of you playing along at home, Wanda has decided to walk along the door frame and for some reason thinks that she can balance there just with 2 feet as opposed to 4 feet. She is a tiny cat who is pretty switched on, but also not very clever at times. So hence she needs a little bit of rescuing. My impressions of the show. So Rhys Darby is Stede Bonnet, who originally when I saw him, I'm like, you just look a lot like Rhys Darby. Is this what you're playing? But having actually had a bit of a look at some kind of classical representations of Stede Bonnet, he actually does kind of look like what apparently he looked like. So to forgive kind of your imagination there, the other thing that I kind of liked about the characterization is that he fully just has his New Zealand accent. There's no attempt at actually being English. So she just keeps wanting to go back up on the doorframe. She'll be fine. You can join me. I was just talking about Rhys Darby playing Stede Bonnet. So I'm a little bit confused about. Anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about. I need to stop actually watching what's going on in the background. His characterization is interesting because he's playing a character, but also he's very himself. And I think we've seen a number of things with Rhys Darby in it, and he has a very kind of particular way of doing things. I don't want to say that he plays the same character every time, but some actors bring their flavor to whatever it is that they're doing. But he plays the character in a way that is kind of interesting because on the one hand, as we've already established, he has up and left his family to go pirating for completely unexplained reasons. This is what he decided to do this day. And then he also has this real care about the men who are within his employ. He has still standards about what he wants his life to be, even though he wants to be a pirate. So you're kind of, you know, in this real kind of moral quandary about who is this person, why is he doing this, what is going on, what does he care about, who does he care about, which is, I think, is an interesting place to start from. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they sort of attempt to root it in parental issues for Stede, like he's taking care of his men in the way that his own father didn't take care of him.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's somewhat lazy Freudianism on its face, but they actually get a lot of good dramatic work out of it. And his dynamic with the crew, I mean, they resent him because what he's doing makes no sense. His approach to piracy makes no sense. The idea that they get paid a living wage for just turning up
Yeah.
is very silly to them. But it is really interesting how the show, over the course of the first 3 episodes, you just lock in on what they're doing. You actually come on board with, oh, I see. The writers and the directors and the cast are giving us enough information to get to know these characters, and then boom, you're in. Like 3 episodes in, all of a sudden, I really cared about these people, and I cared about what happened to them, and I didn't want them to get killed by the British Navy.
Yeah.
And Blackbeard's fascination with Stede actually made sense to me because I was going, yeah, there's something very peculiar happening here.
It is
Um,
very peculiar. And I think that's exactly it with his relationship with the crew, because they're all there not out of choice, but because they have to. This is the lifestyle that they were, that was on offer to them. Whereas Stede could have just stayed home and lived his landed gentry life and had his children and heirs and family and wife and all the rest of it, and never a worry would he have had, but for the fact that he randomly decided to go buy himself a ship and go pirating. So, but then I think what's interesting there is he still has all this pomp about him, and then he's surrounded by this crew that doesn't have that. So there's this weird counterbalance that is happening between them. But then it also gives the opportunity to kind of develop those characters a little bit. So it's not just about that. They start to give the characters a little bit of depth. There's some relationships that form. I will be honest though, because I kind of didn't, it probably took me a couple of episodes to get into that. Like, I think it initially establishes the tone, but it is such a weird idea that this man would go and do this, and you have to kind of put it all together, that I think it took a couple of episodes before you kind of are exposed to the idea that these people have relationships and what's going on here. I was reading that while most of the cast was already kind of in play, they didn't actually, well, Taika was already an executive producer on this show. He wasn't necessarily cast as Blackbeard until sometime after production had kind of started or was intended to begin, which I think is interesting because the showrunner David Jenkins had said that he'd kind of written the character with him in mind, and that tracks because I don't know that there's anybody else who could have played that character to the way that it's presented, which it's interesting because I don't know. I feel a little bit strange about the way that his character is portrayed, because you often assume, oh, Blackbeard. Well, you don't assume. We've been given this concept of Blackbeard as this manly man and strong and terrifying and blah blah blah, all those things, or weirdly camp and dirty as played, Captain Jack a la Johnny Depp version of. So what he's actually supposed to be, I guess, it's fair. Play with the characterization, play with it. And again, as you say, it's like he forgot to do the homework, as he did with Hitler for Jojo Rabbit, where he just didn't do the reading and played the character, and it's fabulous. So I found it's funny. It's a show where you anticipated stuff to happen in a particular way, and it doesn't do that, and I like it for that.
Yeah, and I think also it's worth bearing in mind that we are still centuries later talking about Blackbeard. And one of the reasons why we're talking about Blackbeard is that he built this reputation on his being terrifying and a murderer and all these things. But again, the story goes that he very rarely actually got into fights. He very rarely actually engaged in combat on the seas because he was smart enough to know when not to.
Yeah.
He survived a very long time on his wits. And while the show does take a lot of left turns in the depiction of Blackbeard from what we know, again, really works with the actual record because what we know is largely rumor and legend and myth. So it plays into that, or the common perception of him is largely invented. So we can sort of play around with that. The other thing the show does do is depict him as being incredibly smart, as being somebody who has this understanding of the sea that he lives by. It just comes to him naturally. So when he starts instructing Stede in how to be a pirate, there is actually some genuine knowledge being passed on. It's not simply
Oh yeah.
be the meanest bastard on board. It's also here's how to judge the current. Here's how to judge the wind. Here's the distance you need to be from the ship you're pursuing. All these things.
Yes.
It comes across quite naturally. It's really well done. And then there's an amazing episode where the tables are flipped slightly, where Stede has to show Blackbeard how to be a gentleman, which largely involves being expert in passive aggression.
Well,
And
so great.
it's a great episode. It's just
So great.
really, really fun. But Blackbeard, is a very cinematic character. And I think you mentioned Johnny Depp. Blackbeard actually featured in the Pirates movies. It wasn't Depp didn't play him, but he is somebody who still lives on in our memory. And again, using that as a sort of cornerstone for this story, and then sort of saying, oh yeah, Steve Bonnet is a real person. Oh yeah, this actually happened. And then telling this kind of story where it's like, well, these pirates have their own society. They have their own rules, traditions, codes of conduct, and maybe we can learn something from that. Maybe there is something to be said about not accepting the norm. And the real tragic moment in the show is when it appears as if Stede just feels like he should be able to slip back into his old life. And the viewer, we all of a sudden find ourselves sharing the perspective of his wife, played by Claudia Doherty, where we're like going, no, you left. Why are you back? No, why are you coming back into this space? And why do you expect to be allowed to come back? Why do you expect
Absolutely.
this to be handed to you? And that's where I think her role in the show becomes much more interesting. I think she was originally presented as a sort of shrewish character, and I was very disappointed. I was saying, no, Claudia Doherty's amazing, because I saw her in Extraordinary, which is an Irish horror film, which I absolutely love. Really, really great film. Everybody listening, watch Extraordinary, great movie, paranormal horror comedy. Claudia Doherty plays this really evil person in it, and she's delightful. But we've also recently seen her in that show Killing It, which is all about hunting
Yes.
gators in Florida, and she's amazing. And she is a great sort of audience surrogate for her storyline in this show. And again, it comes back to this idea of what a man feels he's entitled to,
Mhm.
what a man feels he's owed, and whether that allows for the existence of the woman in that person's life, like whether she gets to have any say it's what she wants. Yeah, so it's amazing. I think we hadn't started watching it yet, and it's been, I think, 2 months since we watched it. It's a while ago now, but we hadn't started watching it, and I was still on social media. We're no longer on social media, folks. We deleted our Twitter, but I was still on Twitter, and there was this sudden influx of Our Flag Means Death fan art.
Oh yes.
And a lot of it was images of Taika as that leather daddy pirate character that we first meet him, and then lots of romantic depictions of the cast. and lots of shipping, lots of fan art of actual romances that we see on screen. And given that most of the characters on screen are male, I like that the depiction of homosexuality in the show isn't situational homosexuality. It doesn't seem as if it's like, oh well, you'll do. It seems to be more
Yeah.
like, oh no, yeah, no, this is who I am. This is fine. It's breezily queer, which I don't think I've seen before.
It's so funny though, because I Googled reviews because I think everything that I've seen has been basically universally positive in terms of the response for the show generally and the performances and what's done, but also for its queerness and representation and how people feel about that. Because I feel like I didn't feel like it was, as you say, a forced thing. It felt, this is reality. This is, it's incidental. It's what it was to the story. But the negative reviews, like, I love negative reviews. They're so funny to me, especially when it's something that you like fundamentally know is a good thing. Like, I love negative reviews when you think something is complete trash, and to see if if there are people out there who agree with you. But the vast majority of negative reviews that I've seen of this are like, oh, I made it to episode 3 and then it got really queer. And I'm like, what? Why? Like, why can you just not suck your shit up for 5 minutes and watch this show that is actually doing something interesting? That, it's it it makes me really sad that people are so intolerant as to say, I can't enjoy a thing because it's queer. I can't enjoy it. Like, it's not even like in your face. I didn't think anyway. I just thought, it was part of the characters and part of their development and part of their relationships. That's components. We have umpteen television shows where there's a mom and a dad. I don't have a problem with that. That's clearly indicative of a heterosexual relationship. Oh no, like, what are we talking about here? But it's funny because initially I read something about it before we'd watched it, and it's like historical romance. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Historical romance? I didn't know what was going to happen. So I thought maybe it was just a misprint before we watched the show, and then we watched it. And no, it is a historical romance. But I think it does it in such a way. There's multiple characters that have relationships, and I think it does it in such a way that is really generous in the performances and the interactions between the characters. And Blackbeard and Bonnet, I think, is really lovely. Like, it comes to a really beautiful point, and the dialogue is really lovely around it. The support players are very good. There's a couple of things, actually. One of the things is that it looked like, I assume that it's performed on a soundstage, and it looks that way. But it's also got a real depth to it, which I find really interesting. It's like almost if you're restricted by your background and they have like a green screen or something going on to make you feel like they are actually on a boat in the middle of somewhere. But it almost like amplifies the performances, I feel, or it like centers you more on what is going on between the characters and what the actors are actually bringing to the piece, without distracting you with big sets and big landscapes and backgrounds and stuff like that. But I think it's really great. There's some really fantastic performers. I didn't realize that Ewan Bremner was in there. He plays Buttons, until there was one point where I'm like, oh, hang on. Like, he's done stuff. What's he doing here? But he's very good. Joel Fry, who plays Frenchie, who was, I think most recently we would have seen him in, was Cruella.
Cruella, yeah.
But he's done a couple of different things as well. His very kind of recognizable face. Who else is in there?
Christian Nairn. So Joel Fry and
Christian
Christian Nairn, they're both Game of Thrones actors who are on this, but yeah, Christian Nairn.
Christian Nairn's is interesting. Hey,
Yeah.
like, because he played Hodor.
Mhm.
For those of you playing along at home, I didn't watch Game of Thrones, with the exception of his very instrumental episode, which you made me watch, and you're like, look, it's really sad, and I'm like, I have no context for this, I don't know what's going on. But he himself is a gay man, and I'm like, cool, play the role, do the thing. And I'm like, it makes me happy when people get to play, like they get to portray the thing that they may not have seen on screen. So various different kinds of actors in terms of what their identity is, if they get to play different roles and actually be that thing, who they are, that they can identify with. You can pass that on to the next person who, again, like may not have had that experience. Does that make any sense at all, or am I just rambling?
No, I mean, the other example from the show is Vico Ortiz, who is gender non-conforming and plays a gender non-conforming character called Jim. But everyone, the characters in the show, just start referring to Jim as they, them. They just do it. And again, it's not like
not a question.
It's a matter of fact. It's not, oh, let's have a very special episode to talk about gender non-conforming. It's just like, oh yeah, Jim. That's Jim.
Oh, good. And, that's Jim.
And also, Jim can kill you. So be nice, Jim, basically.
That's it. And I think there's a few others that turn up. Funnily enough, one of those negative reviews that I read was talking about people being too political. And they're like, oh, but Leslie Jones is great in this. I'm like, you're talking about people being too political, and then you're talking about how great Leslie Jones is. Have you got any idea how political Leslie Jones has been in life and generally and on the internet and all these kind of things? I'm like, what are you talking about? The
target of a political hate campaign.
Absolutely, exactly right.
Yeah.
So other supporting who pop up, Fred Armisen, of course, this is totally, within his wheelhouse. Kristen Schaal, Nick Kroll. Who else? And Will Arnett are probably and Angus Sampson, who you were quite glad to see in the role of King George.
I'm so fond of Angus. Like I've talked about it here before, but like I went to a screening of The Mule, which is his very revolting Aussie crime drama movie.
Watch that one.
And he was so pleased with himself. He was like at the door welcoming people to the screening. Come on in, come see me eat some poo. Come on in. Like he was so happy, and I was like, oh man, good for you.
Nope.
Get it?
Nope, and more nope. Well, look, I have a feeling this hasn't been my best communications. We've had the interruptions of a small cat trying to climb the walls, quite literally. But I think at its core, what we're trying to say is this is something that's doing something a little bit different. It is a bunch of men and gender non-conforming humans who are gallivanting around on some ships with a green screen, who are doing interesting things in various costumes, and it's got good dialogue. It's not laugh out loud funny, which I think people sometimes expect, particularly when you see the likes of Taika and Rhys Darby. You expect to be, barrel laughing, but you expect to be laughing, but it's sweet and pleasant and doing something different without drawing attention to the fact that it's doing something different.
It's very heartfelt. It's very moving. It actually engages with a historical record while at the same time somehow ignoring it completely, which is which is a beautiful approach. I really like that. I have these issues with historical depictions of actual people presented in a way that removes them from any facticity about their life. Whereas somehow this approach where you just invent it, but you stay true to the idea. I don't quite understand how you walk that line, but I really appreciate it. And perhaps because of that negative pushback from certain quarters, but also the widespread endorsement of this show by this online community, there was a very delayed announcement that there will be a season 2, but there will be a season 2. Which thank God, because it ends on a bastard of a cliffhanger. And I really want to watch more of this show, and I really want to find out what happens to these characters. And again, last podcast and left, the Dollop, a few other podcasts have done the story of the gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet. So you can learn what happened to Stede. You can read about, there's all sorts of books about Stede and Blackbeard, but it's a tragedy, and I expect the show will also be a tragedy. But I also expect to be sort of continue to be warm, and that is such a rare thing.
Agreed.
That's why I love it so much.
Cool. So watch it.
Yeah, you should watch it, folks. You can't find us anywhere You can find us on our website, howsketchfriday.com. You can find us on anywhere you find podcasts, but you can't find any social media stuff. Really.
Revive the Instagram. I swear I will. I will zombify it and wake it up and bring it back to life and put things on there, maybe, if you're lucky. We'll see.
Very good. And we've got our list of episodes, and we're going to tick them off as we go and start pumping out the content at a more regular clip.
Yes.
Very good.
Correct. I will do better.
No, not on you. It's on both of us. And the cat. The cat has to play her role too. For instance, not interrupting your recording. Thank you for listening. Till next time.
Thanks for listening.
This has been Hopscotch Friday. You can find us via hopscotchfriday.com, at Hopscotch Friday on the Twitter, or you can email us at hopfriday@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.